everybody. Hey guys, I know it's been a while. Been busy studying and working and studying. So, had a thought on a thing that I've noticed. And punchline, I don't have an answer. I just have an observation. So, in college, I actually took a philosophy course. And we discussed Socrates. And one of the neat things that Socrates did, one of the neater things in my opinion, is he drew the conclusion that in order to discuss a thing with someone, you must first agree on terms. And it sounds pretty basic, and it sounds, duh. But one of the things I've noticed in the wider pagan community, so I've been studying traditional craft, Gardnerian craft for 10 years, and, therefore I've very much been in a Gardnerian sphere for about 10 years. Since I've become a third degree, I've been trying to branch out and kind of rejoin the greater pagan world, and it's been observed that all books, all sites, all movies, all blogs seem to be directed at beginners. And there's a few notable exceptions. There's one new one coming out, Thorn Mooney. It has a new book that's supposed to be, not just for beginners. It's supposed to be at all levels, which I'm really eager to read, by the way. But the majority of works have been written, have been done primarily for beginners. And I think one of the reasons for that is differences in definitions. And just to give an example, I'll give two. So the first example, and it's kind of a silly, one that doesn't matter too much, is pentacle, pentagram. Which is which? You have the star without a circle by itself, just a 5-point star, and then you have a star with a circle around it. Depending on who you talk to, they will tell you, well, duh, the answer is blah, blah, blah. When you go on pages, Facebook pages, blogs, what have you, you see a lot of people arguing, oh, well, this is this and that is that, and they'll give you academic sourcing, and for what it's worth, I've actually seen pretty damn good arguments on either side, and I also submit that there's also a third definition for a pentacle, by the way, and I think that realistically, the level of argument upsets me because I feel like in context, if someone says, oh, hey, look at the new pentagram necklace I bought, or the new pentacle necklace I bought, you know what they mean, you know what they're talking about, and I think some of it we all need to get over ourselves a little bit, but the other side of that, different context of conversation, different levels of conversation. So I was contemplating earlier today that since, quote unquote, having graduated, I will always be a Gardnerian, and I will always continue to practice Gardnerian as far as I can see for the foreseeable future, but that I have become more eclectic. And in my brain, I was saying eclectic academically, as in more diverse, more, involving from different sources, more, yeah. Well, and I kind of giggled because for so long, eclectic to me has been you're either eclectic or you're traditional. You either pull from all sources or you belong to a specific tradition or line of thought, which is goofy to me because for people who have, and for me to know if you haven't, if you study the academic history of quote-unquote magic, quote-unquote paganism, insert term here, it all intermarries. It all comes from different places. You've got large doses from the Middle East, large doses from indigenous populations all over the world, large doses from, a lot of different different factors, and in that way I'd say it's all fairly eclectic. Punchline, spoiler alert, Wicca's not Celtic, period. Granted, that was before what we thought Celtic meant changed and evolved, and that's quite fascinating. If you're into sociology and anthropology, check that shit out. But, back on the original line of point, I don't know how, as a community, we get around this argument of what terms mean. You have a social aspect and you have an academic aspect. And what I mean by that is, I was an anthropology major, and one of the things that our professor always tried to make us understand, and you kind of either get it or you don't, what a culture is academically. So pick one, specifically a living one. Okay, so Native American culture, cool. What you read in a book. Well, Native American culture is this, and frequently a book will say, from X year to X year to this thing and that thing, this space to that space, and it creates this lovely little box. And it'll say, XYZ culture, practices and beliefs, PDQ thing. And at the end of the day, definition and life tend to diverge quite a bit, meaning that there are most assuredly people who consider themselves indigenous that don't actually fit inside that box. What if this tribe came 3 years before the academic definition, or so on and so forth. And I think we're at a similar crossroads in paganism, but it's happening at the same time that we're living in. So, you get this definition, and case in point, go on any public forum and say, hi, I'm a newbie, how do you define paganism? Or even better, not how do you, but what is the definition? The definition of paganism. And you get, there's several reoccurring ones, quote, any non-Christian faith, or quote, any non-Abrahamic faith, some version of that, quote, pre-Christian European faith systems, quote, shamanic faith systems, quote, and all these different things, and, or, Pagani comes from the Italian word for, village dweller, or, heathens come from the word heath, which meant people of the heath, which were not in main town, and therefore country folk. And it's not that any of these are necessarily wrong, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody or tell anybody that they're wrong. Rather, I encourage people to embrace the idea that to some effect, multiple people can be right. And I say to some effect, because I think, on the other hand, in a lot of communities anymore, everybody's right. Everybody is entitled to their opinion. Yes and no. And that's the hill I'm going to die on, because I think if you can find a logical reason for why you think what you think, great, and I'm willing to listen to you. But I think there's a lot of people that spew shit just because I'm entitled to believe what I want to believe. Please have a reason. Just doesn't have to be my reason, just have a reason. But beyond that, for example, pentacle, pentagram. Which one's which? The one with the circle around it, which is it? I've heard equally dispersed definitions. I don't care, really, at the end of the day, and that one, like I said, is a little silly to me, because, it really doesn't matter. We generally know what someone's talking about. But, have a reason. I encourage people that when you assert something, you can assert it, but just have a reason. Any reason, a reason that you can defend, or at least say, I got here because. There are many, many ways to the center of a field. One can come over the river and through the woods. One can come straight across. One may have taken the highway. You're still in the center of a field, more or less. Just have a logic behind it. But I think part of the problem in the greater pagan community, and by that I mean everybody, is that we get stuck on these definitions of things, and we don't really give people people allowance. I think so many people want to be right. They want to prove themselves. They want to show they know what they're talking about. And I think maybe if all of us, myself included, could stand to bring our ego down a few notches, and instead of needing to be right, what if we said, okay, wait, what do you mean by that? Well, I said, eclectic. Okay, that's fine. I heard you, but could you please tell me what you mean by eclectic? And in that way, nobody's wrong. It just points out that maybe what I think and what you think are two different things. And instead of needing to be the one who gets to be right, let's instead find the middle ground, or at least find a ground. I've had many conversations where I'm simply like, okay, you're talking to me, you're explaining something, can you tell me what you mean? And I'll make a mental note. Or, if it's a lecture that I'm listening to, I may even literally take a physical note and just go. Eclectic means non-traditional pagan, or eclectic just means derived from many sources, because those are two completely different things, potentially. And I think that it's fascinating to me, and I think, and going back around to my main point, or where I was trying to go with this anyway, I think that as a community, we are stuck in the beginner phases because I think we've misunderstood the fact that other people don't understand us for the fact that they don't understand anything. So instead of going, oh, well, okay, here we're going to have an ABC book and I'm going to tell you what a pentagram is today. No, you could simply say, and by pentagram, the definition I use is XYZ, and now let's move along. And I think I'd like to see a little more of that in the community. I don't really know how to inspire that, specifically without pissing people off. But I think I would really love to see more of the idea that there's deeper understandings and that's okay. And I really think if we could simply, as authors, as writers, I have not published anything yet. I have written many, many things over my lifetime, and I hope to be published at some point. But if we could, instead of getting wrapped up in the inane, wrapped up in the basic, maybe have a prologue or a chapter 1 going to define terms, which happens in a lot of academic work, for the purposes of this work. Not that I'm telling anybody how they have to call something, but when I say A, I mean this. When I say B, I mean this. Because I think that there's a lot of wisdom that could be shared through the community. There's a lot of different kinds of people out there. There's a lot that goes on. And, I was introduced to somebody the other day. Sounds absolutely freaking brilliant. Sounds, she has a background that sounds like it's not really anything like mine, which is good, by the way. I love diverse and new kinds of people, new experiences, and so on and so forth. But, as I'm talking to her, I realize, okay, she said this, she meant something different than what I would have meant, and that's okay. But I think it's important to make these notes that people don't always mean what we mean. And I think that more people get too focused on being offended. They get too focused on needing to be right. They get too focused on needing to be the one to be like, no, you're wrong. And I really, 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 really encourage everyone, anybody watching this, next time someone says something and you're like, that's not what that means, instead of saying, no, that's not what that word means, say, what do you mean by that word? What did you think? How are you using that? Where does that come from? Because words at the end of the day are simply constructs we use to explain abstract thought. And without sounding bullshit philosophical, what I mean by that is thoughts and emotions are imprecise. Words are a step closer to precision, but they're not as precise as I think a lot of times we would like to think. And I'd really like to see a community where instead of arguing that people are wrong, we can simply define our terms and then move into deeper conversations. Where we can see, okay, in the about section for this group in this page, let it be known, these are the standing definitions for these things. Okay, thank you. You may discuss now. Or, I mean, even if we want to discuss, well, where does this definition come from? Where does that definition come from? One of my favorite sadistic questions to ask new seekers, and there is a questionnaire, a lot of us traditionals have a questionnaire, we will immediately say things like, define paganism, define magic, define religion, define witchcraft. And it's not that there's any right or wrong answer. I mean, it is possible to have a completely off-the-wall bullshit answer. That normally doesn't happen, because most people have two brain cells to rub together, but it helps to know where that person's coming from. You know, it helps to know, okay, this is the definition they're using, and sometimes we can even have a thought of, okay, this is the language sector they're in, you know, and for those of us who've read a lot of books, we've seen a lot of things, you know, for example, sometimes we can smell Ravenwolf a mile away. Oh, okay. So in our neck of the woods, these words mean different things. And, you know, and that can be one of, I think, the hardest part for people about joining another group. Specifically people joining a tradition. I've noticed, you know, I frequently get asked, well, why do you automatically get to assume your definitions are right? Well, I don't. But when you come into a group of people that already exists and there's hundreds and thousands of us and you're one person, I'm sorry, you have to learn to adapt to us. It's just the way it is. It doesn't mean you were wrong. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. But when you're coming into a predetermined system with all kinds of publications, it's just kind of the way it is. Well, now that being said, if I went into a Druidic group or a group I'm not familiar with and they start using terms differently, hey, I'm going to have to adapt to that. You know, and again, it's not a matter of being right or wrong, and I think some of the warring that I've seen between eclectic pagans, eclectic witches, and traditionalists is some of these misunderstandings. Here in the States, you know, I think a lot of people like to get offended in general, and when something isn't the way they expect it to be, it isn't the way that they're comfortable with, I think very, very frequently we react with offense and aggression and F you, I'm not wrong, you're wrong, you know, and honestly, I joined a bunch of pagan groups recently, and I promptly turned around and left them 3 days later, because it's constant infighting, it's constant, you know, battling, it's constant, you don't know what you're talking about, I know what I'm talking about, and I really think, honestly, 9 times out of 10, I deal with adults personally, so I'm going to say we're all adults here. I generally do not work with the underage, but when you're dealing with adults, people of age, we all tend to be fairly reasonable. We all tend to at least have reasons for why we do what we do, why we believe what we believe. You know, say someone reads a book by bullshit author so-and-so. Well, it might be bullshit, but they have a reason and they don't necessarily know it's bullshit. You know, so, okay, hey, why do you think that? Or why did you say that way? Oh, okay, cool. Well, you know, da-da-da, this is where I come from. And I think that we really can do more to meet in the middle and not to be all kumbaya and mushy-gushy, but I really honestly think if we want to advance the skill level of the community at large, I think that as a community at large, if we want to get to a point where we can have more groups, more books, more people that are able to be at an intermediate and an advanced level and have these discussions, I think we really, 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 really need to first focus on how we talk to each other, on how we define terms, how we decide whose terms get to be the terms of choice. You know, it's fairly obvious, for example, at least it is to me, if someone's trying to come into my tradition, well, okay, I'm happy to help teach you, but the tradition terms are the terms we're going to use. Well, what happens if it's not that easy? You know, if you go into a mixed group, you know, who's going to give? Who's going to bend and be like, okay, well, da-da-da-da-da, you know, if you're mixing, you know, genres, so to speak, who's, you know, because I have a family member who's a Mason, and for example, Wiccans, specifically traditional Wiccans, refer to what we do as, quote, the craft. Masons refer to what they do as, quote, the craft. And it can be very confusing when you talk to people. You know, it's like I was explaining to somebody not too long ago. The quarters, east, south, west, north, or in no particular order, fire, air, water, and earth. Which one's which? punchline. It depends on who you're talking to. And explaining, you know, various reasons. And I think there's a few different theories on why they ended up where they were. If you look at a map at where the tradition or where the teaching that you're getting comes from as far as which element is which, I found, at least in academic sources, if you look at, so for example, Trad Wicca is from the British Isles. Well, to the west is an ocean, to the south it gets hot, you know, to the east is where prevailing winds came from, so that ends up being air, you know, so on and so forth. And you end up with really neat reasons. Well, if someone lives in a completely different part of the world, it's frequently flipped around. And I once heard another system where north was actually water. And I was like, hang on, I want to check something. And I checked the geographical location of that system. And the first thing to the north of these people that created the system was an ocean. Their ocean was north of them. Well, that makes perfect sense. You know, so on and so forth. And I think that when we realize more and more, you know, kind of how these things work, I think that if we can find a way as a community to get beyond the language barrier, because at the end of the day, that is what it is. Your vernacular is not the same as my vernacular. It doesn't make your vernacular wrong. You know, it doesn't make my vernacular wrong. It's just different. Well, if we can get beyond this, we can get to a point where I think we could start to have some really cool conversations. You know, I have been very blessed to talk to people who are not Gardnerian, who are not traditionalists. You know, I've talked to Masons insofar as they've been able to tell me about various things. I've talked to very academic Satanists who were like really into what they did, and able even just to compare, you know, well, I do this because this, well, I do that because that. Even if it's not something you want to do, you know, I've had some really neat conversations. Well, every time it started with, well, this word means this here, well, this word means that there. And I really would like to see more people being able to have those conversations, because I think we can really truly enrich each other. I think that with so many diverse ideas, so many diverse people, you know, we have more and more countries coming online with the traditional Wicca, and I can only imagine the other branches of paganism all the time. We have a lot of different people reawakening, different countries. I want to say there was a Nordic country that recently reaffirmed its faith as being, you know, Old Norse paganism not too long ago. You know, various different things that I think with all of us, you know, popping back up, we really could very seriously learn from each other, you know, and I would love to see more of that. And I'm curious, you know, I haven't ended a video with a question before, so I'm going to do it now. What do you guys think? You know, if you got to the end of the video, you know, comment, you know, what do you think we could do more to create community? You know, what do you think we could do more to understand each other? You know, do you think we should have some kind of traveling dictionary of terms, or, you know, what do you think we should do? So that's my thoughts on the matter, and I hope you all have a great day. See you later.